Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. I'm very pleased to be joined by Mike Hopkins. Mike is the CEO of Bakken Energy. Not only than that, he has a long and distinguished career on multiple series of startups, mainly all around the energy space. So maybe, Mike, could you start with that and give us a little bit of a background on your involvement in energy? I've seen you've been heavily involved in the battery side, electric side, and now obviously the hydrogen side with Bakken Energy. So maybe give us a little thumbnail biography of what you've been up to and how you sort of come into the hydrogen space now.
I'd be happy to, and thanks for having me on this show today. My background in energy started when I began my career out of university. My college education, I started work as an attorney with a law firm called Bennett Jones that was and still is a large Canadian law firm. It sort of distinguishes itself as specialized in energy. So that's what I joined when I came out of school. That was my specialty. Specifically, I worked on many large scale power projects on the commercial side and on the financing side. And I did that for about 18 years, which brought me to California working for a client of our law firm. And this was in 2001, which, if you remember, this was an unusual period here in the United States, California specifically, which is where I was in Silicon Valley, where you had two things happening at the same time. One that I related to because it was my background, which is the California energy crisis. There was this extreme shortage, or at least perceived shortage of electricity, a crazy run up in electricity prices and big disruption. And that's actually what brought me there for the client. At the exact same time, you had the bursting of the tech bubble that had developed over a period of time, and that's when it popped. And that was my first exposure to tech of any kind. And as you might imagine, Nadeem, I think it was a really interesting way to be first exposed to an industry and especially exposed to people, because this was like the complete implosion of an entire industry, or the seeming implosion. And it really shook out a lot of people that probably didn't belong in that industry. And those that did emerged. And I saw people under extreme stress with everything going wrong. And I think that's a really quick way to get to know somebody well, is when things are all going wrong, you kind of get a quick read of what kind of a person they are. So I met all kinds of great people, and really, I'd say, fell in love with tech, decided I didn't want to be a lawyer anymore. What I wanted to do was be an entrepreneur, specifically clean tech, using my energy background. And that led me to a career especially focused on renewables, energy storage, including thermal energy storage, battery energy storage, and then most recently, like the last 4 years, 3 years, clean hydrogen, which is what I do today.
Yeah, and that brings you to Bakken Energy. Bakken Energy, obviously, I guess from the name, is located obviously in Dakota on the Bakken, natural gas or oil reservoirs. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit about Bakken Energy specifically and the work you've been doing for the last 4 years?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So this work began joining some friends of mine, investment bankers, who were focused on what was going on in North Dakota. The short version of this is that North Dakota, in a relatively short period of time, emerged as a major, as in the second largest oil producer in the United States. However, with that oil came associated gas. All the oil that's produced in North Dakota comes with natural gas, whether you like it or not. And the state did not have and does not have the infrastructure necessary to deal with that natural gas. They get out of the state as much as they can through existing pipelines, but it isn't enough. And to avoid shutting in oil that's needed, they flare the natural gas. They have the worst flaring in the country. And within North Dakota, the worst flaring occurs on the reservation, the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, which is where you have the three affiliated tribes, also known as MHA Nation. And our company, I'd say, started with this broad focus of we want to fix that problem. Like, what's the best thing that you can do with that? Starting from a baseline, Nadeem, which is the worst thing is being done.
Yeah.
So you got that as your base case. It's the worst you can do. So anything's better, but what would be the best? And over a period of time, getting to know the parties, especially I'd say MHA Nation, we came to the conclusion that the best thing you could possibly do would be to take that wasted, polluting resource and transform it into clean hydrogen using state-of-the-art reforming, in our case, autothermal reforming process with carbon capture, sequestration, taking advantage of the unique geology in North Dakota, which is ideal for sequestration, deep rock formations. And we developed this relationship with MHA Nation and are working with them to do two things in the area of clean hydrogen. One, produce very large volumes at a very low cost while we eliminate extraordinary flaring on the reservation and more broadly in North Dakota as this business expands. And then the other thing we're working on with MHA Nation is the equally important, and I'd say more complicated than production, the distribution of hydrogen. It's one thing to produce it. It's one thing to use it. I think the most complicated part of it is how do you move it? Because the starting point is when you talk about hydrogen, there is no infrastructure. There is no like electricity grid like we have for electricity. There is no natural gas system like we have for natural gas. There's no infrastructure really to speak of for clean hydrogen. So that, I guess, by definition, makes it complicated and expensive. Yeah. And you have to be as creative as possible as to how you're going to do this safely, how you're going to get what you produce to the consumers. In our case, we decided there's only one way to do it. And that is you have to work directly with your target market. Our target market is long haul trucking. So we have agreements in place with Pilot Flying J, the truck stop company here in the United States, with Cummins, leading diesel engine manufacturer that's now a leading fuel cell manufacturer, with Schneider National, the big fleet owner. So we're developing this, I'd say, collaborative effort with the actual intended consumers of our hydrogen to figure out what is the most cost-effective way to get hydrogen produced in one place in North Dakota to the trucking industry in the whole upper Midwest. We have at our disposal, actually, trucks. They move hydrogen, either gaseous tube or cryogenic. That's though the most expensive. That's the most expensive way to move hydrogen is in a truck. Less expensive, but not currently done, is rail. So we have a relationship with BNSF, the largest railway in the upper Midwest, to look at two things. Actually, them actually consuming hydrogen for locomotion, as well as them becoming a shipper of hydrogen, because that would be the less expensive way to do it, much more efficient. And then the last way, difficult, but by far the lowest cost, would be pipeline, hydrogen pipeline. It's one of the things that the Department of Energy, when they decided to kind of lay out a grand plan for hydrogen, which they called the hydrogen shot, and talked about how do we go from where we are today, which is sort of nowhere, to where they'd like to see us, a hydrogen economy. Hydrogen pipelines need to be a part of that. You need connective infrastructure for this to actually be viable for everybody. So that's also part of our exploration and planning.
Yeah, perfect. And in terms of the M&H Nation, they're involved in Bakken Energy, or how do you manage the relationship there? What, do they have interests or support, or?
So we have a long-standing working relationship with MHA Nation. Initially, the idea was they would be the supplier of the gas, this gas that's being largely flared. But that has evolved into, I'd say, an expanded, closer relationship where we want to be partners. And that's the intent of our relationship, is that we would do this as partners in a joint venture. We want this to equally benefit or benefit them even greater than us. They have, I'd say, a long history, as do all the tribes here in the United States, of having been disadvantaged economically, disadvantaged in terms of environmental consequences of development on their lands. And we see this, and I see this personally, our company sees this, and I'd say the United States government sees this as an opportunity, not just to do a clean energy project, but to do something truly transformational for a group of people that have not benefited the way they should have from their resources, from their lands. And this is something that can be of great benefit to them. I could certainly see, if we do this right, I could see MHA Nation becoming one of the largest producers of clean hydrogen in the country. And I see this, Nadeem, as a model for other tribes. There are other tribes, a number of other tribes in the United States that have, I guess, similar issues and problems, but similar resources and therefore similar opportunities. So I would hope that this might actually be a model, whether we actually start collaborating with other tribes or they simply look at what we're doing and say, that's a good idea. I'd like to do that too.
Excellent. You're obviously speaking at the forthcoming World Hydrogen North America Congress in Houston, mid-May, May the 15th to 17th. Obviously, a lot of discussions there around obviously the hydrogen hubs and how does your project sort of fit into the, I guess, the US landscape of hydrogen hubs? As the Great Plains Hydrogen Hub, is it part of that, which is obviously Dakota based?
Well, we're in the middle of all these things. And I think as I guess a starting point, I'd say just to be clear about terms, a lot of talk in the United States recently, because we're coming up on an April 7th deadline to submit applications for funding. A lot of the discussion has been about, yes, regional hydrogen hubs, very precisely defined as regional hydrogen hubs that are competing for grant money under the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, where there's $7 billion that is going to be awarded to, I'm going to say 6, 7, 8 regional hydrogen hubs. Yeah. These are hubs which are, by requirement of the legislation of the Department of Energy, hubs that involve multiple states, multiple companies, universities. So they're collaborations, they're groups that are getting together to make their case for grant funding. Yes, we're definitely interested in that, but I'd say well before there was a Infrastructure and Jobs Act that was making available this grant money, we had already decided we were going to be a hydrogen hub as defined by the Department of Energy. Which is not the regional hydrogen hub. It doesn't have to involve multiple states, universities, many companies. A hydrogen hub, as I look at it, is, if you go back to our earlier conversation about there's no infrastructure in this country, we need to build it. The Department of Energy's vision for this would be, let's have people create hydrogen hubs, meaning self-sustaining ecosystems where they produce hydrogen in some area. They store it, they transport it, and they have consumption all in their area. Yeah. And I'd say that's like a model of necessity. That's the only way you can do it. If we just said, well, we're going to produce a lot of hydrogen in North Dakota, and I hope somebody...
Stay in North Dakota, isn't it?
Yeah. So that didn't make sense. So we embraced this, I'd say, early definition of the Department of Energy, which is, if you want to be in this business, you probably want to think as a hub, an ecosystem. You create your own little world. And then as you're doing that, which is absolutely what we're doing, we are creating our own production, distribution, storage, consumption. I include these trucking companies within our hub, in our ecosystem. At the same time, we look to other hubs, other regions, other regional hydrogen hubs where we can collaborate. I think at this stage, I'm much more interested in creating a business that's self-sustaining and viable than I am on competing for a grant or grants that, yes, we'd love to have grants. Who wouldn't? And if we get it, that's great. But I think obviously thinking longer term, you've got to be thinking about a business. And that would be, I guess, my one criticism of the whole regional hydrogen hub competition is, at least in the early days of that, you had a lot of people that were just saying, well, I'd like to be a hydrogen hub. And here's my friend and here's my other friend, and let's call ourselves a regional hydrogen hub.
Yeah, I mean, it's the similar, I guess, with when the solar industry started, and specifically in Europe, we had feed-in tariffs. Everyone wanted this feed-in tariff contract. it didn't really help in terms of pushing people down the cost curve. And then auctions became, the mechanism of choice, and they really started creating a real sort of
Yeah.
competition. People were actually thinking about creating commercial businesses and obviously, creating profit and having, customers and competing. So fully with you on your focus, and giving you a sort of track record in terms of entrepreneurship. That it's not surprising, I guess. Interesting, just on the trucking, you obviously see a long-term value then for hydrogen in supplying trucks, and given the other businesses you're involved in that are involved obviously in the battery side, you see that an area where hydrogen can outplay electric drivetrains.
Yeah, I do. Through my work, I've worked for a long time as a advisor and a board member for a company called Plus Power, who is used to be a startup. Now they would be one of the leading developers of large scale batteries, so far lithium-ion batteries, front of the meter in the United States. So I'm very familiar with the battery world. I certainly have seen firsthand the success of batteries for mobility. If you look at the success we've had with EVs, I wish it was more, but it's been good and it seems to be going the right way. I guess it's an interesting statement about the whole hydrogen business and how it's been evolving or even revolutionizing is that in my early days of hydrogen, so call that 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, our focus was on other uses of hydrogen than trucks because I did not see trucks as a likely market. I saw trucks as just sort of a later on thing. You have EVs, you have light trucks, you go to heavy trucks, and it was all going to be battery electric. What I observed happen, and this started, I think, about 2 years ago, is that after the long haul trucks, so in our case, these so-called Class 8 vehicles doing long haul routes in the United States, after they did a number of demonstrations, investigations, early stage products using battery electric trucks, they were encountering issues that they were having trouble overcoming that weren't really working for that long haul trucking market, where you had batteries that were and still are heavy for that application, large for that application, requiring longer recharge time than really works for truckers, didn't have the range that they wanted. And that, I think, began the interest in hydrogen. And then obviously, as hydrogen has been very incentivized, which it has here in the United States, the cost structure of hydrogen changed during that period too. And all of a sudden, hydrogen as an alternative to diesel instead of battery electric vehicles as an alternative to diesel started to get interesting. So just again, not trying to argue the case of why that should be, but just observing what Daimler Trucks does, what Volvo Trucks does, what some of the startups like Nikola is doing. Although I guess I look more to like the big legacy truck companies about, is this like just because they want it to happen, or is this a serious thing? I follow more the lead of a Daimler or a Volvo when they start to invest heavily in trucks that are either using hydrogen with their internal combustion engines, or what I think is the more likely route, fuel cells. So they're going to be electric, but instead of batteries, they're going to have hydrogen. The investment that they're putting into it, and I know this firsthand from the work that we're doing with the trucking industry, that's the direction I think it's going. It's not to me so much a question of are they going to be adopting hydrogen? It's going to be how quickly, over what period of time, at what scale, what does the ramp look like? In our case, it's not, Nadeem, like we got to like get it exactly correct, because the need of long haul trucking, like it's such a, there's a reason it's the biggest polluter in the country, because they use so much energy, diesel in this case. So the volumes are so large that relatively very small adoption over the next 10, 15 years, ramping up very slowly, far outstrips what we can produce. So at least with our, phase one. So I think that's where our bet is right now. That and the fact that while we're very focused on what we think is a very serious interest in large volumes of affordable hydrogen, all around us, there's other interesting developments in terms of hydrogen usage. whether that's fertilizer, refineries,
Yeah.
power. I think we tend to stay away from the ones that I think are just not as serious, not as likely. Cars, I know there's hydrogen cars. I don't really see that as where we should be focused. Heating, don't really see that as where we should be focused. Uh, I think I like to be focused on where I think hydrogen has the highest value, and that would be places that are very polluting and aren't easy to decarbonize with renewables and batteries. And I think as long as we stick to that, we're in a good place.
Excellent. In terms of the project itself, whereabouts are you? You've been working on a number of years. You're some way through the project, and who are you specifically looking to meet at World Hydrogen Congress North America? You're looking to firm up some partnerships with some of the technology side. You're looking speaking to financiers. What are some of your shorter term goals over 2023 and 2024?
Well, at the upcoming conference, I'd say we certainly have a specific interest in OEMs, vendors. We're getting into scoping out like who we want to actually supply the equipment. In our case, we're looking at autothermal reforming, but there's all kinds of equipment needs, as you might imagine, when you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar, very large-scale greenfield project.
Yeah.
Also very interested in those that are involved in the storage of hydrogen, the transportation of hydrogen, whether that's gaseous tube, cryogenic trucks. Those are all areas of great interest to us. We haven't focused on those, and that's why, I'd love to be starting to engage with those folks. We've been very engaged, as I already mentioned, with the trucking industry and have very good relationships there, as we are with, I'd say, other producers and states and government. So that category would be one area. Financiers, yes. I mean, I think we're, as developers go, we're very well equipped when it comes to financial backing, thanks to the founders of Bakken Energy. They've put us, Stephen Lebo and some of his colleagues have put us in good shape in terms of, we have a number of billionaires amongst our shareholders, which is always helpful.
Always helpful, yeah.
As we get further down the road, and the requirements that we have financially go beyond what I'll call development work into like actual construction, then the numbers get big, where you're looking not really to your shareholders, you're looking to institutional investors that are looking to invest in large scale capital projects with good offtake and good returns. And that's certainly what we're intending to develop. And since those type of discussions aren't good discussions to have the day you need the money, that I guess that would be another place where starting these discussions, where we're able to share our early stage work and what this looks like, and when we will need that kind of financing, which I'm going to say is like not quite 2 years out, but almost 2 years out is when we want that type of financing. These are good relationships to start cultivating now. And
in terms of that project pipeline, you just timeline, which you just alluded to, I guess. So it's a 4 or 5 year development cycle.
It's I'd say a good call it 2 years of development, in the sense of we're into engineering, pre-engineering, engineering, into our feed, permitting, and then you're looking at 4.5 years of construction. And this is how you go from today to a 2030 commercial operation date, assuming, everything goes as planned.
Yeah, perfect. Excellent. Well, it's going to be fascinating Congress, fascinating to talk to you, fascinating space to be working in, and great to talk to you and meet someone who's, got the experience you've got. It's certainly, it's going to be interesting. We look forward to helping you on the journey and introducing to all the various partners, and Bakken Energy being a good success, both obviously for yourselves and your shareholders, but also for the MAH Nation. So many thanks, Mike. Thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts today. It's been great chatting to you. Look forward to chatting again in Houston in mid-May, May 15th to 17th.
I'm really looking forward to it as well.
Yeah, great. Many thanks. Take care.